Escape to the metaverse, but act like you know. Yeah, you are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. Yeah, you are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah.
Hey everyone, before we begin this week's episode of the Matthew and Rizzle Show, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Cryptonatrix, welcome to the Matthew and Rizzle Show.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, really excited to have this conversation with you today. Get into topics that we don't normally dive into, like cryptosexuality and all that good stuff. But before that, I think it would be great if you could kind of give our listeners a potted history about yourself. Tell us about where you're coming from and what brought you into the web3 crypto NFT space.
Yeah, so I am Cryptonatrix. I got into this space in 2020. I think a lot of people know me as, probably safe to say, the most visible and outspoken sex worker in the Web3 space. But I have a pretty extensive background beyond being a sex worker, which I've done for a few years. I also have a very political background. I used to be a journalist. I've always been an artist, but I didn't get to ever professionally pursue that. So I'm really fortunate that I found this space where I can kind of combine all the things I care about and just be myself. In my past, a lot of the work I've done always happens to be at these very important intersections that no one seems to want to talk about. So now I'm at this sex work and Web3 intersection. I heard about NFTs through a friend who is now the creator of Forgotten Runes Wizard Cult, which you guys probably know. So like when he told me about NFTs, he also kind of got me into crypto in 2020. I had been interested in it before, but I didn't really have access to it because I didn't have like a proper ID and I was like living overseas and I was super fucking broke. So even though I was sort of interested in crypto for a while before, I didn't really dive into it until 2020, thanks to this friend. And yeah, when he told me about NFTs, I was like, whatever that is, I have to do it. And we talked about how there was not really any porn NFTs yet, but there probably would be. And it seemed like a really exciting time to get into it. It was also great for me because I was really fucking broke. This is like the first year of COVID, and crypto and NFTs and sex work have all helped me find financial independence while also, doing what is accessible to me. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I've seen the space change a lot in this time from my particular perspective. My motivations for being here have changed. My hopes for being here have changed, and like my whole vision about what this technology can do has evolved over this time. But yeah, there's like a lot of shit that's happened in the time that I've been here, and I'm still here. And yeah.
I'm here. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, man. I was just gonna say you're like I feel like a great and like important presence in this space, and honestly, I feel like I'm surprised there aren't like more outspoken people like saying the same types of things that you're saying, which is why like I'm really happy to have you on. So so our listeners can learn more, but to be completely honest, like I can too. And I would love to hear like your perspective. Actually, before I go forward, I would love to say your ENS address, fuckthesystem.eth, is like one of my favorite of all time. So I just wanted to like throw that out there. But would love to hear like your take on like that intersection of like Web3, NFTs, crypto, sex work, like where the overlap is, how that like may have or may not have like changed over the course of time here. Like, yeah, just really interested to hear your take on like that whole landscape.
Yeah, so I think sex workers have always been the pioneers in technology for sovereignty and different models of interacting with buyers. And sex workers have also been early adopters of a lot of technology. And it's always the pattern that once we do that and once we like pioneer, then we are ostracized from the very thing we have pioneered and built. There are a lot of examples of this. You know, OnlyFans is one example. We are being deplatformed constantly from things that we created. So a lot of people know that sex workers are early adopters of crypto because we needed an alternative payment system. I know tons of sex workers who have been using crypto for years. They've onboarded hundreds of their clients into crypto. So while we have been these early adopters, I don't see us being accepted in Web3 because Web3 is more of a social, cultural landscape than it is purely a technology, right? And so I think that we're going to see these same patterns, and we are seeing it already, where we get ostracized from the very things that we pioneer and the very thing that a lot of people know could help us the most. Even decentralized exchanges are not completely safe for sex workers to use. I've heard about Coinbase shutting down some sex workers' accounts. Recently, Gemini froze my account. This is not something that we've heard a lot about yet, but it's just an example of how this technology that has so much potential for us and that we've also helped pioneer and bring in a lot of people into, how we then get kicked out of it. When I came into NFTs, I had a lot of hope. Maybe I was a little naive, but I was also always very cautious. A lot of people have always asked and like bring up NFTs as like a great solution for sex workers, like because they always know only about like the surface level of like the OnlyFans drama and all this stuff. So people are like, well, NFTs will be great for sex workers. But I think there's also a lot of reasons that NFTs are not great for sex workers. And that mostly has to do with the attitude that comes into it, like the general societal attitude towards sex workers and the stigma, because that's like the social level of Web3. Does this make sense how I'm explaining it? Like,
mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I think like even when we pioneer technology, like on the social level, we are rejected. I was one of the first artists in this space to really be vocal about getting our own smart contracts. And I was one of the first artists to get a contract with Manifold, like before they opened to the public. And I've been selling directly on my own website, which I think is the best option for sex workers, as opposed to using these NFT platforms.
I think we can dive down into a lot of these avenues that you're kind of going by. You're giving us like the large take right now.
Yeah.
So just keep flowing.
I'm honestly interested to hear like what you're going into about the platforms and everything, and like I can completely understand why you would want to be like an early adopter of Manifold. What's the hot take on the platforms and how that plays out moving forward?
So when I first started NFTs, like it felt like one of the bigger issues was that there was no platform for sex workers. Like I was censored on Rarible very, very early on and with no explanation.
Were you censored because of your art, or were you censored because of like some like NFT experiment you were running, or do you have no idea why that you were censored?
It was a GIF of me wearing a strap on. There was no nudity in this GIF. It was just removed. And I
feel like I've seen so much worse stuff on Rarible.
Right?
Yeah.
And there was not even any nudity. I mean, I know it was like sexual, but there's plenty of other stuff. So like, what is it? Like, who made that decision? Like, I like tried to reach out, never ever got a response. Also, like earlier last spring, there was some kind of weird thing going on with my Rarible where you couldn't see half of my pieces on that site. So I don't know, but clearly like I have no reason to trust these like mainstream platforms. And so when this stuff started happening, like I and others, we were like very excited and like hopeful that 18 plus specific adult NFT platforms would come around. And they did last spring, and they were all a huge fucking disappointment. I personally would not recommend any of them to anyone. Like maybe there are a couple decent ones out there.
What's like bad about them, just out of curiosity, or like what would make one, like what would be like an ideal one versus like what's currently out there?
So some of the first ones that came out, which are still the big ones now, they have had some really bad behavior from the teams that involves like threatening to dox the sex workers using their site. There's been other like harassment from teams, just from people who like tried to offer like a critique or a suggestion, and people like have gotten harassed for that. There's been so many red flags around these sites that like didn't have any sex workers on their teams or involved. And when all of this stuff started happening last spring, I was one of the more vocal people about it, of course, because like I, have values and I don't want to settle for these shitty fucking middlemen. Like most of these platforms are just more of the same old shit pretending to be something new, and it's just more the same old like middlemen who doesn't actually give a fuck about us and just wants to take advantage of us. A lot of platforms then, like when they saw this stuff happening and me talking about it, which like really fucked with my mental health, because like people were getting like threatened, and that's really scary for sex workers. And, we have a lot to lose by getting doxxed. So when I was like talking about this, when it was happening last year, it was like really fucking with my mental health.
I mean, I can only imagine, like, especially how like frustrating it is to like, be hopeful that there's like a new paradigm opening, and then you like find out it's like, just masquerading to the same bullshit as before. Like what would obviously like people who aren't assholes like on the team, and like probably someone with like some experience as like a sex worker in the industry, at least in some respect, are there like platform specific things, like tech specific things that are lacking, or is it really just like a matter of like interpersonal dynamics and like shitty people being in charge of these things?
I think the people who tend to see this as a business opportunity, and the people who tend to jump in and be like, hey, let me create a platform for sex workers. Like if they're the first ones to jump into this, and like it's probably a red flag. Like, who are you? Where are you coming from? Like, why do you think that we should trust you? Like, it's probably possible to create a community-owned platform, but everything is just so messy. Like, even the platforms then that like then they saw all this shit happening, and a lot of them asked me like, how can we be better? And at that point it was like too late. Like, you started a platform without having any sex workers involved on your team, and not even that necessarily means anything, because some of these platforms that were like doing the threatening had sex workers on their teams. Like, so honestly, I don't fucking trust a single fucking platform anymore. And it's probably because of my personal experiences with all of them. Like, I am honestly done with them. Like, there's still some that try to reach out to me, and now they see like that my opinion on them matters, and like they see that what they have been doing hasn't been working. And like even recently, some of these old shitty platforms have reached out to me, like asking me to endorse them and stuff like that. And it's just too late. Like at this point, I don't think that this technology should just be used to repeat the older structures of sex workers depending on a certain platform that's going to fuck them over anyway. I think that we have an opportunity to use the technology to make us more independent. And I think that's how it should always be used. That's the point of this technology, right? And crypto in general is to make us more independent. So I was totally disillusioned by all these platforms. And I did try to give them a chance at first, but eventually I was just like, fuck all of them. We literally don't need you. Like, we can create our own smart contracts. And that's why I did that.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because I totally agree with you. Like, there's no point in repeating this, what happened on like Web 2.0, where a couple big aggregators kind of just take all the profit, and all the actors, actresses, sex workers who are making the content that people are coming to these platforms for, just kind of getting fucked over. They're getting like triple fucked. And in order to avoid that, it seems like going the independent route, like utilizing the tools that empower the individuals, seems to be like a really promising direction, and something that you're actively engaged in and helping to build out this sort of, or like clear this pathway for other folks to follow you. So could you kind of elaborate on like how you think the best path forward for other folks from the industry that are coming in to Web3 and crypto, how they could start to think about and utilize the tools available to them to empower themselves heading forward and to avoid those mistakes that you've been really clearly pointing out?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely believe in everyone getting their own smart contract. I guess that's sort of an advanced step. Like, I don't think most artists, the first thing they do is create their own smart contract. It also takes a little bit of money to do that. But ideally, I think that's the solution. And then we can build around that. I mean, I also think, just to put it out there, I think that alternative chains like Tezos, and I think that's also great for getting started in this space, because it's a little more accessible, obviously, for people who are new. But yeah, like, once you can get your own contract, that's absolutely what I would recommend. And I've been really, really fortunate that someone from Manifold has helped me out with that. I've been using their beta marketplace directly on my own website since September or October. Mm-hmm. I do think that it's more than the technology, though, that we need to consider in how to make this space work for sex workers, because Web3 is very much about valuing creators, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that sex workers are valued as creators. I think that's obvious. Most people who watch porn never pay for it, right? So there's a whole mindset towards sex workers that needs to change. We need to be seen as creators, creating value that's worth paying for. One issue that I've seen with sex worker NFTs is that the buyers feel very entitled to utility, more so than they would with other artists. Right. And like, I know from Web 2, that we can't really trust our buyers the way that artists in this space should be able to trust their collectors. Am I making sense? Like, so,
yeah.
So
you
like,
get a lot of creepy weirdos.
Yeah. And if I'm going to, for example, create a token gated site, which a lot of people say is like, they think is a great idea for sex workers. Do I really want like all these bros buying my tokens and getting access to something, and then they have control over who else accesses that? Like, they can decimate my floor price, they can like just give it to someone else. I think there's a lot of things that we need to think about in like the collector artist dynamic, that it's different when the creator is a sex worker. Then there's been other projects like last year. Do you know Spank Chain and Spank Pay?
I mean, yeah,
of course. So I was part of the first edition of the Pop Shots, which were like a trading card collection. I don't know if you saw that, but I mean, they sold out immediately, and there's like some secondary sales, but a lot of the buyers that I saw, they were asking like, well, what utility comes with this? Like, do we get a free custom video? Like, do we get to go on a porn set? Like, and like that kind of thing. And that's just that's kind of a ridiculous thing to expect from a sex worker to, continually give to whoever buys your piece on the secondary market for however much someone else decides it's worth. Like creating a custom video takes a lot of work. And so there's just like also dynamics like that. Like, I think there's just a lot of the attitude towards sex workers that affects how we're seen as creators that needs to be considered when we're thinking about how we can best use this technology, because it's not the same as other artists. Overall, 100%. Yeah, independence is the way to go.
Yeah, I guess it's obvious when you think about how many different challenges sex workers face, just in terms of basic stuff like managing your audience and their expectations and what they want to get out of their experience. So Cryptonatrix, I have sort of a stupid question, maybe not stupid, but if I'm a sex worker and a really shitty artist, you're an artist, in your own right, outside of everything else, you actually create cool art and have some skills in that area. I would imagine not every sex worker is talented in that area specifically. So of all of the, and obviously sex work crosses many different, I don't know what you would call categories or what the best term is, but in terms of the use case of crypto, to me is very obvious and apparent. And I'm glad you mentioned earlier about how far ahead sex workers are in adopting all this technology, because I'm sure that gets swept under the rug constantly. But so that value add to that industry is super obvious to me. But I feel NFTs and some of the things you can do with them, the correlation isn't always super apparent, aside from straight up, maybe buying a picture, buying a short video clip, but also we all know the technology is still sort of janky and limiting, and it's not you can be putting out super high resolution production quality content, I guess depending on what you're into or your skill set is. So so it's sort of a long way about going back to my original question, if you're not actually creating art in the conventional sense, what's the best utility for NFTs for sex workers out there currently? Does that make sense?
Probably using unlockable content features.
Okay.
Because people buying porn, they just want to jerk off, right? They don't even necessarily care about buying a specific person's token. So yeah, I think honestly, unlockable content is probably the best thing that's available as of now. Hopefully token gated websites I don't know. I feel there's a way to do token gated websites. I don't know. It's hard because of, I said, there's a lot of potential issues with token gated things also. So yeah, that's a good question, but probably unlockable content.
One of the things I've been thinking about, you've just been throwing out so much food for thought, I think. It's not even early. It's day zero or before the actual birth of this whole space when it comes to sex workers and crypto, I think. There's just so much education, it seems, that's still needed, right? When it comes to the sex worker side of things, when it comes to the consumer / patron / collector side of things, right? Education on what tools or tech to use, all of that, and then funding too, to help onboard folks, whether they come in Ethereum or Tezos or any other chain and start engaging and using this tech. There needs to be some sort of fund to help onboard folks from the sex industry into the space, right? That's all of those bits and pieces all entail a ton of work. So I'm just kind of ruminating on that. But this other side of the equation, when you're talking specifically you as an artist too, thinking about collectors and thinking about how the typical collector artist relationship sort of falls apart when you add sex into the equation and tokens and tokenomics and things like that. I sort of wanted to pull on that thread a little more because me myself, as I'm talking with a bunch of artists that I'm helping to produce, one of the things I'd love to bring up is the fact that the artists are in the power seat in terms of being able to curate their collectors, right? Mm-hmm. I think I think in the past, the dynamic has always been about collectors curating the artists in their collection, right? Mm-hmm. And the artists and their work being this thing that the collectors can control. But now, because the artist doesn't necessarily need to sell to any particular or everyone, every collector, they can pick the collectors that they bring in to their circle. So I'm just kind of curious, like maybe there's a better way for artists, for sex workers to start curating their clientele. I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know if that makes sense. I just kind of want to throw that out there because I feel like that's the power, or one of the key powers that these tools provision, is to be able to self-select who you bring in.
Yeah, definitely. The collectors that I have curated, like I love most of them. You know, some of my collectors are like friends. Some people buy my art because they just love my art and what I'm about. Other people do buy it because they would be a client of mine. So I have a pretty wide range of the types of people who collect from me. Also, what that brings up is the fact that it's all transparent and on the blockchain. And do people want other people to see that they are a fan of a sex worker or that they are a client of a sex worker? So the stigma affects collectors as well. I really hope we can use this space to do that and do what you're saying. And I also think that it's still hard to do that because it's all out in the open. I am pretty unapologetically myself in all ways. Like I talk about sex and pegging or whatever, and I'll also talk about like mental health and PTSD. And so I think from doing that, that's kind of how I've managed to curate a pretty wide range of collectors just from being myself. But yeah, it's interesting who wants to be seen supporting a sex worker and who doesn't. And like I do also have some anonymous collectors who might like be the type that they want to be my client, for example, but they don't want people to see that. You know, there's also a lot of, shame and stigma around supporting sex workers and like being seen as a client. So yeah, I think even that question again comes back to the attitude and stigma issue and how that's reflected in that.
Do you feel like crypto has like helped break down that stigma a little bit? Or do you feel like it's all the same as it has been either way? And then I know you said you were overseas. Like, do you feel like this is like a pretty universal stigma, or are there some places that are significantly like more accepting than others? Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that I have managed to create my own space where there's less stigma, but the fact that I am one of the only people being this vocal shows that there's still a big problem. I have a lot of sex worker friends who've been following me for a really long time, and they're like sort of interested in NFTs, but they also see how horrible people can be in crypto. I mean, we all know it's a male-dominated space, and we know that like women aren't always welcome in this space, and sex workers also, on top of that, experience stigma from other women. So, you know, there have been women who are seen as community leaders who have said sex industry should not be in NFTs. And just, you know, straight up excluding us. So it's hard to compare to outside of crypto. I don't know. It's really hard to compare because I feel like I see the stigma and the issues everywhere on NF Twitter, in the crypto space. Like, I mean, it ranges. Sometimes I see bullshit everywhere I look. Like every time I fucking scroll on Twitter. Even people making jokes about OnlyFans that actually hurts us. It's hard to say if there's less or more stigma in crypto than in other places. There's definitely a lot of it. And that's why I'm so unapologetically myself, because I want to make sure that I'm creating a space like with my own people where that shit doesn't happen, but it definitely still happens outside of my space. And that's why there's not more of us here. I mean, we're always an afterthought. Like, for example, I won't get like too into all the comments that Brantley made from ENS about, transgender people and homosexuality and porn and masturbation. No one seemed to think how those comments affect sex workers. Like, we were just not a thought in anyone's mind. Like, it was all about like men who masturbate felt targeted by those comments, but no one thought about sex workers. And, those comments came from Brantley's like Christian excuse of having a Christian background. And Christian porn abolitionists are the reason why sex workers are getting kicked out of Web 2. Like, those are literally the people that are lobbying and like advocating to get us deplatformed in Web 2. And so to see these ideas like being spread in Web 3 and no one even realizes that it's about us, that was really alarming to me, and just showed that like no one even thinks of us in this space. So yeah, I think that like in some corners, people understand that this is a space for real decentralization, but I do think that it's still very much like these old ideas are still very much prevalent, and I don't think it's any different. Like, I just think this space is a reflection of everything else, and it's an opportunity to set an intention that we can handle things differently this time, but we have to talk about it. Like, we have to be aware of it. We have to think of it. We can't just like let these comments slide and have no one think about how it's affecting sex workers when we are like probably the most marginalized groups in this space. And just the fact that I am such an anomaly is evidence of that, I think.
Dude, I really like what you said about how you created your own safe space. I feel like that in itself is like such a big deal and probably a huge inspiration to others as well. Sorry, man, I didn't have a question or anything. You go ahead, man.
Yeah, it's such a unreasonably hard situation. And there's so many different problems that are intersecting this whole space that make it even thornier, right? But it's so ridiculous because all of us, all humans, like, we need sex. Like, if anyone is honest with themselves, they love sex. And then if they're really honest, they know specifically like what turns them on, what kinks they have, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just like that lack of being honest that's just really frustrating whenever you see folks like disparage or talk ill or attack like sex workers. It's like, how ironic of a human can you actually be? It's really, really absurd. Yeah. But the whole promise of this space, and like, I didn't come into crypto for sex or anything like that. I came into crypto because I'm weird. And there's a bunch of people doing a bunch of weird stuff over here and being really honest and passionate about their quote unquote weird stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the next, like, if you zoom out more, like thinking about these passions that people have, it seems like there should be a home in Web3 for folks that are in the sex industry, for folks that have these kinks that are super niche or whatever. And it's a place for people to kind of form communities around them and support one another and all that good stuff. But because it seems like everyone's been so fragmented up into this point and marginalized and kind of they need to be so private and hidden about it, that community formation is slow to happen, or is happening slowly, like a positive take. But I feel like folks like you who are open, like extremely open about sharing all of this, hopefully that helps people become a little bit more engaged so that they can form, or you all and everyone can form pockets where they feel safe and help support one another. Man, there's just so much to talk about and go here. Let's try to focus on like positives, right?
Yeah.
In this next, like the next 3 to 6 months, like, is there anything, any fund, any initiative that we can think of to drive attention, awareness to, like, what can we do to start making a more positive difference? What can we do to help set up safe havens or support folks directly or indirectly so that we can help build out the foundation upon which like a stronger community can form?
Yeah. One thing that I want to mention first is that we need to know we are supported, because shit is going to happen to us. You know, platforms will take advantage of us. People will steal our content. All this has happened. And I think it's important that we know we're supported, because most of the time sex workers are the only people fighting for ourselves. And I think that's also a reason why a lot of my friends don't necessarily want to come here, because they see the shit we deal with and that we're often just fighting for ourselves. So I think it's important that a lot of people are more open. I think we need to be open to having these conversations about these things that seem negative, even though, like, I know we want to focus on the positives now, but I think that just listening is one of the most important things, to know that we're being heard and that people care, because normally people don't. Yeah, there are some things that I'm working on. I mean, I'm going to keep doing my art, and I'm also sort of forming a DAO or two. One of them is for sex workers. It's focused on decriminalization, which is the political goal that's the best for sex workers. We want decrim, not legalization. And so a few of us are figuring out what a DAO around that would look like, what would make sense. But that's very slow forming. I also sort of working on an initiative. I won't call it a DAO yet, because I'm not sure it needs to be a DAO, but to onboard more people into getting their own smart contracts and like providing resources about that. And now that Manifold is open, like a lot of that's accessible already. But yeah, that's been one of my goals, is onboarding people that way. I've also written a guide in the past for sex workers how to get into NFTs independently. I honestly think the most important thing to do is to listen and to help destigmatize sex work and our presence in the space. And I don't know if I'm answering this question great. Because I'm sorry, I know you're probably gonna have to edit me a lot, but like I don't really know how to answer this question.
Yeah, I think you're doing great. I don't think there's like really any good answers to like any of these questions, which is sort of like one of the reasons why we were so interested in talking to you and like hearing your perspective. Because I feel like if anyone at least knows what we don't know, it's probably you, or you know how to best navigate these situations or whatever.
Yeah. And also like I didn't mention this article that I'm writing, but I'm also a writer, and I'm planning, maybe I shouldn't talk about this. I don't know yet.
So it's up to you. We love alpha leaks, but like, you don't want to set yourself up for something that, you can't release or whatever.
I mean, I was going to mention the article that Friends with Benefits is fucking me over with, but
Dude, you can talk trash on people here. This is a safe space.
Well, another thing you can do to support us is share information about what we're doing, like what we're fighting for, such as, the Earn It Act or like other, I'm confusing myself with what I'm trying to say now. I don't really know what else to say.
I only had like one other question for you, but I also want to make sure like you got in everything that you wanted to say, and that kind of thing.
Okay. I'm also writing an article about all of these issues. The last one that I published was about a year ago in The Defiant about destigmatizing sex work and NFTs. And so now I'm trying to write a sort of follow-up about that, about this whole intersection of Web3 and sex work. I did find a publication from a group that we all know in this space. They asked me to write this article a few weeks ago, And I told them all of my ideas like they asked for. And then a week ago, they told me that I couldn't write it anymore and that they had another journalist who happens to have never written about Web3 or sex work before, that they want her to cover this topic, which makes no fucking sense. And, you know, I was really excited to have a platform to talk about all these things. Like, obviously, I can only talk about so much in the time of our podcast, but there's just so much. And I was really excited to have a place to share that. And then they basically rug pulled me and do what often happens to sex workers, which is that our ideas and content get stolen from us. And, so I'm not sure what's happening with this article specifically, but it's something to watch for whenever it happens, wherever it happens. Yeah,
that was actually the post that prompted me to hit up Matt and see if he wanted to hop on the podcast to talk about all of this in the first place. So I'm glad it's sort of like, even though, like you said, there's only so much time on the podcast, we were able to at least uncover some of this and talk about some of this and at least give our audience a heads up of the type of stuff that you deal with and sex workers deal with both on a regular basis and in this space and in Web3. One thing we love to do as we sort of get towards the end here, completely shift gears, is sort of like a inappropriate dive into people's NFT wallets. I guess it's not super inappropriate, but as NFT collectors, just always genuinely interested in do you collect other people's NFTs? Are there cool projects that are totally unrelated to anything that you're doing currently that you're interested in, or what else is out there in Web3 besides stuff that you're directly involved with that you either collect or think is cool?
Yeah, I collect quite a bit. I'm invested in a lot of projects. I like to buy art from my friends, especially. I love collecting photography. One of the pieces I've collected most recently was from Alex Walker. She has a collection called Seven Sins. I've got one called Greed and one called Lust. It's like a series of self-portraits, which are really cool. I'm also really excited about Julie Pacino's film project, if you've heard of that.
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
Julie on the podcast too. She's an amazing human being.
Oh, she was already on your podcast?
Oh, for sure.
Okay. I didn't see that. And some other bigger projects I love are Crypto Coven, Forgotten Runes, of course, Dead Fellas. I mean, these are the bigger projects that I love. And I collected from a couple other sex workers as well. Judy is one. Pleasers is another. I will admit, for a long time, I hesitated buying collectibles and stuff like that because I was only here for the art, but there are some awesome projects out there. And so yeah, I collect both PFPs and art. Soon I have to mint my Dead Friends. Are you guys into that?
Dead Friends?
The Dead Friends, the Dead Fellas Dead Friends.
Oh, Dead Fellas, familiar with. I haven't actually collected though.
Oh, they have another collection, Dead Friends, and I got a hybrid one, and you don't know what that means, but
sounds rare.
Yeah, it is.
Sounds rare.
So yeah, another one of my favorite artists is Miss Routine, who I've collected from. And I have a lot of other artist friends that I can't afford, but those are some things that I've collected.
Just before we go, make sure you let folks know where they can actually follow you, any websites or anything like that. Then we can wrap up.
Yeah, I have my own website, cryptonatrix.xyz. My Twitter is Cryptonatrix with a 0 as the O. I have an Instagram that I haven't been on since last spring, so don't follow me on Instagram, just Twitter. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Cryptonatrix, it's been a challenging conversation just because there's so much to talk about, so much food for thought, so much is frustrating about what's happening in your world, which is our world, and everything that sex workers have to deal with. It's just so frustrating. It really honestly is at this point. It's so unfair. I hope that folks listening to this will get inspired though, and some of the areas that you mentioned that they can kind of help support. Hopefully people actually take some action there. And hopefully this is just the first of many conversations here, because I feel like we just need to talk more in the open and make people feel more comfortable to have conversations that are hard and frustrating. So I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing for the space and for taking the time to speak with Rizzle and myself here today.
Yeah, and thank you both for having me and asking me to come on here and giving me the space to talk about it. It's honestly not often that I get to do that. And so it was great for me. And I really appreciate it.
Awesome. It's been great. Really appreciate you coming on to talk. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter, and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.